Medevac controversy in Canberra and discuss some of the issues behind that. I'm joined from Canberra by the Human Rights Campaign Director of Get Up, Shen Narayanasamy. Thanks for joining us, Shen. Can you tell me why on earth it would be the case that anyone would suggest refugees on Nauru who have won asylum in the United States, who are waiting to fly out to the United States, why on earth would it be better for those people to come to Australia under the Medevac laws, remaining in detention with now their futures uncertain?
Well, let me tell you something, Chris, and actually I was listening, thank you, to your earlier comments about the case for Medevac, and that might give your listeners some insight. So the case for Medevac was simple. People died as a result of a failure to transfer and treat them appropriately. So in the case of Nauru and in the
hang on a second
beginning to Medevac...
Hang on a second here. No one ever demonstrated that anybody was not getting the medical care required in either Manus Island or Nauru. They had extensive medical services provided at those locations, and hundreds of people had actually been brought to Australia for additional medical care. So there was no one demonstrated at all that there was inadequate medical attention.
Well, that's flat wrong. I'm sorry, Chris. I can point you to, and I'm happy to send you through, the Queensland Coroner's report in 2018, which found that the death of a young man from what essentially in non-medical parlance is a cut on the foot, an easily preventable, treatable infection that sprung from a cut on his foot. He died at the age of 24.
It's terrible.
In the words of the Queensland coroner, a direct failure to transfer and treat him.
Terrible
death. Treating doctors on Nauru sat on the desk of Home Affairs bureaucrats and was not answered. And he died in Australia after being in a coma over in Nauru.
It's a terrible case, but he died in Australia. As a result of a failure
to transfer and treat.
Well, you can argue about when that could have,
I'm not
should
arguing,
have happened.
I'm just retelling you what the Queensland coroner said.
Yes, and the point is, he died in Australia, in an Australian hospital, getting the best medical attention possible. It confirms my point that's always been the case, that medical services have been provided at these locations, and where they believe that they needed further treatment, they've been brought to Australia.
Unfortunately, no. In the words of the Australian doctors in the Australian hospital, they said this man was transferred too late. And that was why, because his application from transfer from the doctors on Nauru saying this man is about to die, you need to transfer him immediately, sat on the desk of bureaucrats. And that is fundamentally what is at the centre of Medevac. And I can tell you, Chris,
well, if you're going to get into timings,
who would you want deciding whether you got treatment? Doctors or the minister?
Well, yeah, I would want the doctors to deliver the treatment.
Doctors,
and the process you're talking about now involving doctors from Australia and applications under Medevac, that hardly hurries the situation up. I mean, so the point here is we've always had this situation with medical treatment at these locations, and always people have been brought to Australia when there's been a need for more treatment. Why is it then that 179 people have been brought to Australia under Medevac laws and not one of them is in hospital?
So, first of all, the thing to state is, well, people died. So when people die, as in any democracy, we need to take these seriously. They're on our taxpayer dollar, they're in our name, right? And if we're holding them over there, then they have the right, like anyone else in the community, to get basic health care.
Yes, now hang on, Shen, we've established this. We've established this.
So if that's the case, Chris...
Shen, just excuse me for a moment. We've established this. There's not a person in this country who argues anybody should not have access to adequate medical care. We've both agreed on that. We might have different positions on it, but everybody understands that that is the goal. Now, I've asked you two direct questions and you won't answer them, so let's go back over them again. The first question is, how can it be the case that refugees who have already won the right to resettlement in the United States could be deemed by activists or doctors or anybody else better off coming to Australia under Medevac laws and remaining in detention with their futures uncertain rather than actually accepting that placement to the United States?
The thing to note about the Medevac process is, Chris, is 2 independent doctors are required to independently
Shen, I've asked you twice before. Shen, I've asked you twice before to address the question of these 20 refugees who could be in the US and are instead in Australia under Medevac laws.
So if 2 doctors have assessed someone as requiring treatment, now that poor person has a really big decision to make, and who knows what treatment is that they require? Only the 2 doctors that have asked the minister to transfer know. So the one thing to note, and obviously this is obvious from the US perspective as well, the US have an extreme vetting procedure, and that includes consideration if someone they have approved for transfer becomes sick. And we can all understand, I mean, you probably are well aware of the medical system in the United States.
These people had one approval.
If the US administration...
These people were approved.
Yes, and the US retains the ability to say, no, hang on a second, we approved you, and if you're sick, if 2 doctors are saying you're sick, we want you to get better before we're going to take you. And at the end of the day,
you are suggesting that it's the US
on the papers.
You are suggesting that the US has demanded they be sent to Australia to get well first.
I am saying that we don't know from the papers what the situation is, but 2 things are in play here. One, the fact that doctors have assessed a person as requiring treatment within the time frame required by the Act, the Medevac legislation, and 2, we all know, and it's obvious to any observer, that anyone approved for the United States also has to pass their health checks, and if they don't pass their health checks, even if they've been approved, their transfer can't be enacted.
Well, these people are approved. I think it'd be a very, very sad thing indeed if they've jeopardised resettlement in the United States just to be part of this Medevac system, which is obviously designed to undermine our offshore processing system because, as I mentioned before, and I'd like you to address this, how can it be that 179 refugees have come to Australia under the Medevac laws and not one of them is being treated in a hospital?
So, first of all, the thing to note is that according to the latest statements by the Minister before the Senate inquiry and the Department of Home Affairs, there were people in hospital. But the other thing to note with this is that what the doctors said at that Senate inquiry was that what they saw in this cohort of patients, only 535 people, Chris, who remained there, was that many of them had chronic illnesses, left untreated for 2 to 5 years, which result in outpatient treatment in our hospitals here. So, for instance, things like untreated diabetes, which we all know if you don't treat it appropriately and manage it appropriately, can result in serious impairment to an individual. Now, the thing is that the Minister hasn't said is that he himself approved 86% of all of those transfers you just named. That means that the Minister got the applications from the doctors and said, oh no, I don't even need to send this to my independent government-appointed health panel. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to approve it myself. So he approved 86% of those people as requiring treatment under the Act without checking it by his independent panel. So obviously he approved it based on the reasoning that he believed the 2 doctors. So I think you've just got to go back to that. I haven't seen these applications, you haven't seen them. The Minister has. He approved 86% of them.
But we're all in agreement that 179 people have come, none of them are in hospital, and in fact only about a dozen or so of them actually even went to hospital after coming to Australia. Do you expect that you'll be able to get everybody from Nauru and Manus Island, everybody here into Australia under Medevac laws? Is that the plan here?
Let me tell you, Chris, from the perspective of someone in the refugee sector, and you can probably imagine what my views are on offshore processing, right? I think the whole thing is internationally unlawful and inhumane. But
well, this is the problem. So you'll support any law that undermines it.
For someone like myself, the Medevac law does not resolve this situation. It's the absolute basic. All it's going to do, as you correctly point out, is transfer people one by one if and when they require medical care, and the Minister can return them at any time. It doesn't end offshore processing.
Have any returned?
But it's the absolute basic.
Have any people been returned after coming to Australia
the
under
Minister
Medevac laws?
I mean,
you don't seriously expect that anybody, once they get to...
attempted... The minister hasn't actually attempted to return any of them, and this is an open question.
Because all of the people have come, because all of the hundreds who have come previously have all remained here. They take legal action to remain here. This is the point. It is a backdoor method to get to Australia and stay here.
It's worthwhile noting, Chris, that there's been no legal findings in the court. So there are some cases in play. With last year the government, on its own accord, transferred 471 people here. So more than double the numbers that have come under this Medevac
That's the
bill.
point. There's plenty of experience.
Not once did the government contest any of those cases in court. So it's quite perplexing from our point of view in the refugee sector and as advocates for these people. The minister just seems to be saying, I can't do anything, but doesn't appear to be trying to contest this in the courts.
Well, some of these have been through the courts for years, and some of them have ended up in the High Court. So we know how this plays out. Are you happy then that the border protection regime is being weakened, is being undermined, and therefore that you might be able to keep these Medevac laws in place with the support of someone like Jackie Lambie?
Well, I mean, look, Jackie Lambie is probably no shirk when it comes to national security, and she was very clear in her statement. She does not believe that Medevac undermines offshore processing, and from the other end of the spectrum, either do I. All that Medevac does is guarantee some form of medical oversight onto treatment and transfer so people don't die.
Well, we've seen a number of boats intercepted since the Medevac laws were passed. You don't accept then that that's at all a causal link?
Well, at this point, there's no evidence to suggest that they are, and I would just ask you to look at the newspapers, look at what's happening on our borders. At this point in time, the government's claims about floods of people within days, its reasoning around opening Christmas Island, which is currently empty of any Medevac transfers, none of that has been shown to happen. So I think I understand at the moment that we all have different perspectives on this, and I thank you for bringing me onto your show, even though we obviously have different perspectives. But I'll leave you with this. We can all have different perspectives and predict different things, and we all did do that in February this year when the Medevac bill passed. It's been in operation 9 months, Chris. The sky hasn't fallen in. We've not got an armada of boats. Christmas Island is empty.
Well, that is the
point.
point.
There's been half the numbers of people transferred under Medevac than the government themselves transferred last year. At the end of the day, do we want anybody else to die from a cut on the foot because an email sits on the desk of a bureaucrat? No.
But this is the point, isn't it? The number of boats that have been intercepted. They obviously, there was a bit of a spate during the election and soon after the election. I don't know what the latest is, but there had been some boats. That's probably the key indicator. You don't accept any connection there?
Well, as you said, it seemed to have been around the election, and in fact, I think that was the testimony before the Senate estimates, that it was around the election, and that's obviously got nothing to do with Medevac. Medevac was put in well before the election, and subsequent to the election and the continued operation of Medevac, we've seen no evidence to suggest any uptick in that.
Thank you for joining us, Shen. I appreciate your time.